Hi everyone, this is Kenny Ross, and for this week's discussion on language diversity in education, I've been reflecting on how language connects to identity and inclusion in our classrooms. One of the main insights I took away from this week's reading is that language is not just a set of words, it's a reflection of culture, relationships, and belonging. As Banks and Banks in 2020 highlight, even though English dominates schooling in the US, our nation has always been multilingual. Recognising that helps us honour the many ways students communicate, whether through speech, sign, symbols, or home languages. William Garcia's work really stood out to me too. They remind us that when schools celebrate linguistic diversity, students are more engaged, confident, and willing to participate. I see that firsthand in my life skills classroom, where language diversity includes not only spoken languages like Spanish or English, but also American Sign Language, ACC devices, and even gestures or vocalizations. Language diversity, I feel, is central to communication for my students. For example, I have a student who greets me every morning by pressing the "Good morning, Mr. Ross" button on his AC device, while another student signs "Good morning" to me. I always greet them back in the preferred way. It's a small but powerful connection. As part of this week's reflections, I'll share our class's favourite morning phrase in 3 languages. In English, "Welcome to class"; in Scots Gaelic, "Fatal don class"; and in Welsh, "Cresolir dochbacht." Each one carries the same meaning, an invitation to belong, and that's what language diversity is all about. It's also a way for me to share a little bit about my culture with my students, because I'm from the United Kingdom and these are the 3 languages within the United Kingdom, so it's good for them to know a bit about my cultural background and identity, and it's a little bit of fun. The kids try to impress me sometimes with their Scots Gaelic, which is different, by the way, to Irish Gaelic. Okay, now imagine we're in my middle school life skills classroom. It's morning meeting, and today's theme is community helpers, which we've been doing recently. And my students use a mix of communication methods: speech, AAC, gestures, and some are bilingual. So let's start our think aloud. So, alright class, we're learning about community helpers. Let's look at our first helper, a teacher. Everyone find the teacher button on your ACC device. So the kids that use these have got their teacher. And they also have teachers' names and everything programmed in, because we've got 3 or 4 paraeducators in the room as well. And my students are pretty adept at wearing their communication device when they need to use it. So everyone find teacher button on their ACC device, and pause, and then let's say it together. Teacher. In Spanish we can also say maestro or maestra. In ASL it looks like this, and I have a paraeducator who can sign properly. I can do little bits, so the paraeducator will sign for my student who's deaf and partially blind. See, we can say the same word in 3 ways. That's what I'll say to them. With voice, with sign, and with our ACC symbol. That's what makes our class awesome. We can communicate in so many ways. Now I want students to connect these words to real life. So I might say, who helps you learn new things every day? One of my students might say in their device, teacher. Another might point to the picture on the wall, and both are correct, because I have the PEX boards up on the wall, and I also have the ACC images, the Proloco images around the classroom too, so students can point to that rather than using their device if they know where it is. For students still learning the ACC navigation, I'll model the step by step. Let's find the people page. Good, and now tap teacher. Nice job. And this helps reinforce the vocabulary and using the device together. I also want to make space for home languages, so I might say, does anyone know how to say teacher in another language you hear at home? And if a family speaks Spanish, I'd model. In Spanish, teacher is maestro. Let's say it together, maestro. Even when my students aren't fluent, they love learning about how words and sounds are different in other languages. We could do this for doctor, firefighter, or police officer, writing the words in English and Spanish side by side on the board. This helps everyone see that all languages are welcome in our classroom. And we also have sheets that have the different English and Spanish words on that my paraeducators will hold up while we're doing this. After this, we'd move on to an interactive activity. We do a matching game. Students will match community helpers pictures to their job symbols on their AAC devices, and I'll narrate it. Find the person who helps us with a fire. Students might point, say, or use their device to say firefighter. Then we role play. One student wears a pretend badge as a firefighter. Another uses their device to say, I help people. Everyone participates. No one's left out because of language or communication differences. I always embed functional language in our lessons. For example, during cooking lessons, we might learn to say or select, I need help, turn on the stove, or stir the soup. These are powerful phrases for independence, and I encourage my students to use English, ACC icons, or sign language. I also might label ingredients in English and Spanish, like milk, leche, bread, pan, so students use visual and linguistic connections. To close the lesson, I might do a quick reflection. Who helps people at school? A student might respond with speech, a device, or even a gesture. I validate every response equally and thank them in their own form of communication. Good job. Or I might sign, well, I won't sign it, but I can do thank you. I was going to say, I was like, sign thank you, or get my pals to help me with that. And, we'll build a classroom where everyone's language, spoken or spoken or unspoken, is honoured. This has been a really interesting week to reflect on. I think this is an interesting theme, and for me, it wasn't just about different languages in terms of English or Spanish or French or German. It's about communication, because I've got 4 students who use an ACC device. I've got 1 student who uses Braille and sign language. So there's lots of different ways to communicate in my classroom. And reflecting on this, I think about how language diversity and multimodal communication are really at the heart of special education. We all honour languages, whether it be English or Spanish or ASL or ACC. We're not just teaching vocabulary, we're teaching connection, we're teaching inclusion, we're teaching belonging. Sometimes a couple of my students who have their ACC device use it as a toy to goof around. They might get a word that sounds funny and repeat it over and over and over and over again to make silly noises, but I'll never ever take the communication device off them. We'll model it, we'll tell them it's not appropriate to goof around and stuff, but I once had a paraeducator try to take it off them because it was annoying, but absolutely no way do we ever take somebody's method of communication away from them. We'll model it and show them how to use it appropriately. Some of the behaviours we have in the class, we've got sometimes, when I say behaviours, I mean bad behaviours, physical behaviours, lashing out. We always see that as staff as a way to communicate. They're trying to tell us something. If they lash out and they hit us, they're trying to tell us something. They can't communicate properly, or they can't quite get to their device in time to do it. So, I try and make my staff all cognizant that all behaviour is communication as well. And we need to learn what they're trying to communicate in the same way you would learn Braille and sign language to support our deaf and blind student, or the same way you would learn some Spanish to support our ELL learners. And when I was in the UK, Spanish wasn't so much the secondary language of many of the students, it was more French. But when the European Union opened in 1992, we got a lot of students coming into the UK from Eastern Europe, so you had a lot of people, kids, families moving into our school district from Poland and Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia, and we also had a big Angolan population, unusually. And, so we had in the school I worked at in the United Kingdom over 50 first languages in our school. The Angolan kids, for example, spoke Portuguese, but a lot of the Eastern European languages, Lithuanian, Latvian, Estonian, they're similar to Russian, but they're different. So it was hard for many of the staff to try and communicate with these kids until they had a form of English. And I respect anyone that can speak a second language properly, but also anyone that can speak probably a more unusual language, and that's what we were dealing with in the UK in the 90s and the 2000s. And we want to honour all languages, as I say. Over here in the United States, it's primarily English and Spanish, And we're not just teaching vocabulary. I think I've said this already. We're teaching connection, we're teaching inclusion, we're teaching belonging. That's what's key. And I just hope that my students feel every day in our classroom that their voice, in whatever form it takes, it matters. It matters. Thank you for listening.